Oil. Well, how much do we have? How much is around? Is it going to be here forever? Hard to say. There's been peak oils and that have come and gone and all that. People have asked me in the past because they know you know, I do criticise those who argue on the climate issue, and I show them quite clearly that the science in that there is no experimental proof, there's no foundation for it, it's incomplete. Models cannot tell you anything. Crap data in, crap information out, for the simple reason that we just don't have the capacity to, or the financial will to add sensors all over the planet in order to capture sufficient information. So there's a lot of so-called adjusted extrapolations and associated sort of phenomenon that are plugged into models, and people think that they can predict the weather. They can't predict what's going to happen in a month's time, weather-wise. Do you think they can actually work out what's going to happen by the end of the century? No. But do we need to transition away from petrochemicals in that regard? Yes, I believe so. Not that I would want to, but the reality is, based on the proven reserves, there's not enough. And based on our current consumption, there's just not enough. So whether we like it or not, whether the elites have fabricated this crisis in order to force a transition, we need to transition anyway. How that's going to look. And the problem is with the current methods is, as I've shown in a video that I did ages ago, and I'll stick it right up there, there's not enough minerals or even extraction capacity at this point in time in order to be able to make a whole lot of electric cars or a whole lot of even hybrid cars. There's just not enough. At some point, we're not going to have the materials on this planet, at least, unless we can get on to another planet or to get access in a cheaper way, something that Elon's trying to do with SpaceX. But until we can actually bring down the cost of moving between space and Earth, where you could say bound to the gravity well of the Earth and its finite resources, or the ones that we know about at least. Now, there may be, we are finding oil even in deeper places, like where we thought there wasn't any. Yes. And you thought it was fossil fuels, or were you deceived by the Rockefellers? I'll let you ponder on that. But it's becoming every year much harder to extract. I've seen some Saudi predictions and even a documentary on Saudi Arabia, and even some Saudi officials that have sort of said, we could probably stretch so many barrels of oils per day, pushing it even further. It's going to be very difficult. They're actually pumping water to try and force up more oil. That should tell you that even they are beyond peak oil for their biggest, you could say the large oil reserve that they've got is becoming harder and harder to extract oil from. So at some point, it's going to become very uneconomical. And they realise that. And that's why they are using the current money to try and build this futuristic city. Whether that's going to pan out for them or not, time will tell. I think it may end up a big white elephant and that whole society could implode. But that's going to be their problem. Potentially could be the rest of us as well. But um, the reality is that there's only so much that we've actually found, and every year we're finding it harder and harder to find more. So it's quite clear, and let alone we've dropped the gun on that. Exploration or investment in that field has also dropped because of the green madness. Could there be more? There may be. I don't know. But we need to be realistic that we need to find transition to something different. So, I mean, obviously we could take coal, we've got plenty of it, and convert it into oil. I mean, the Germans did it in the Second World War. The United States Army has got a facility that actually can convert coal to oil. And they actually keep it running. They actually produce a certain amount. It's sort of a security blanket for them to guarantee supply in war times, so to speak. But generally speaking, the amount of extractable oil is declining, and there's only so many years in it. So we will have to find some other solution. Now, let me just share my screen so people can get a bit of an idea on how much, what's available and all that. So this is the world clock on the amount of oil left in the world. So we're talking about, there used to be, well, that amount, 1.6. Well, it's theorised that that's the amount of reserves that we have always had from the beginning. But, people can argue about that, if that's the real number or not. Currently, that's the clock, 1.3 trillion. We are consuming per year well over 35.5 now. Per day, they say that we consume 97 million. No, we don't. Currently, the level is, this is old. The clock's still running, but the number should be much lower than that. But I couldn't find another clock. But just to show you what the situation is, we're at 102 million barrels per day, and it's believed by the end of this century it will plateau out at 106. That's what the industry is saying, okay? Not me, or, there are other people that saying that the industry is wrong on that number, that it may be slightly higher, and others that are saying that it may be slightly lower. I tend to believe it's going to be slightly higher than 106, but that's what industry is saying currently, and some governments are agreeing with it, but I don't agree with it. I think the consumption is going to be higher than 106 because we're lazy and there is a lot of inertia in the system. And there's also resistance as well. So when you take those things into consideration, you quickly realise that while there is, growth and consumption are going up every year, it has slowed down a bit because of the economic crisis, a lot of the debt levels and stuff like that, especially in the West. Consumption and the cost of general living has meant people are consuming less oil. But it doesn't seem to be stopping because Asia is consuming more every year. So I don't see it stopping at 106. I think that's completely unrealistic. I think it's going to get much higher, probably 120, maybe 125 barrels a day, million barrels a day. Based on reserves and consumption, based on this information, I would say put that to 40 years. So if you're putting, even if, let's say, 45, okay? you're pushing that to 2070. So 2070 isn't very far away when practically you're going to be close to zero. Based on the current reserves, the current information, we may find ways of extracting out of shale even more oil. There's a lot of shale around the world. There's shitloads of shale. So we may be able to extract shale oil. At this moment, large parts of the shale oil have not been exploited other than North America, primarily. Outside North America, very few. There is also tar sands, like in Canada. They also exist in other parts of the world, but they're not exploitable at this point. But if oil tends to be at a much higher price in the future, then it will become economical, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so if we look at, you can see that up until about 2013 and through 2013, 14 and 15, investment dropped off markedly. One, banks wouldn't invest because of the DEI, all that sort of nonsense as well. And that has persisted in that regard. So we've got, but remember, you have to remember that, Margaret Thatcher, when she came into power, she said, drill, baby, drill. What happened? Within, they went through their oil, the British, and they pretty much got it all out of the ground so fast that they hit peak very quickly and declined very quickly. So, there's only so much you can get out of the ground in any one time. So the biggest, the only thing that I can see that would actually would increase or probably double or triple or quadruple, push peak oil all the way out to the next century and beyond, to the middle of the next century, so giving us probably something like 150 years, is shale oil. So I don't, even though people are saying that we're going to run out in 47 years, I don't believe that, is what I'm saying. I don't believe it. I believe shale oil, but oil will become more expensive, which means that either vehicles are going to have to become more economical, or hybrids or things like that, in order to basically keep the cost of moving around. You'll have cars that may become lighter, so with lighter material and stuff like that, which will allow them to be able to move around with consuming less oil per kilometre. So you may end up having a smaller fuel tank for the same distance. So you'll be carrying around less fuel, you'll be paying more for it. So, we'll be making cars more efficient. So we'll be using our smarts to do that. So that's really what's going to happen in that regard. That's what I believe. Looking at historical presidents, is we've innovated, we've improved things, we've lowered the cost of things. Obviously we can't stop the depletion rate. That's not possible at the levels that we're consuming currently. It's not going to happen. But we can exploit other sources, which is shale oil, or possibly even gas. You can actually get gas. You can convert it into oil as well through refining processes. It is more expensive, so you wouldn't actually do it unless you really had to. And it's the same thing with coal. Converting coal to oil is also expensive. You wouldn't do it unless you had to. So there are alternatives. So people that say that we're going to run out of oil are talking nonsense. It's not going to happen for some time. If you were to take all the coal, shale, gas and all these sort of things that we've got, and if we were to push our economy towards using nuclear for electrification using nuclear primarily, or thorium molten salt reactors, even better, because we've got about 44,000 years worth of it just in Australia, let alone the rest of the world. We can power the world for a very long time. We could then leave all these other sources of hydrocarbon energy to be converted to be used for transportation. And that would possibly push things out to 300-400 years. And in 300-400 years, the technologies by then will be so advanced, I suspect we will be using other methods of getting around. We'll have found ways of, being able to power with, being able to produce really cheap hydrogen and all sorts of things. And we just won't need oil. We'll just be able to get it from the water and the oceans, produce very cheaply hydrogen and then use it for our vehicles. So by that stage, so I don't believe that we're going to run out anytime soon, but this will create a lot of what I call oil shocks to the economy, oil crises, which will tend to go hot, you know what I mean, bullets flying. We humans will fight over resources. We always have. So it's just to give you a bit of an idea, guys. So as you can see, there's your consumption, there's your proven reserves. So we've consumed 2.1%, but we're using currently, so compared to the past, we're using far less, because if you have to think, when we discovered oil, pretty much it was only Europe, North America, and Australasia that basically had vehicles. And the population was much smaller. It was a third of what it is, even a quarter of what it is. Now, there's not a place on earth that doesn't have a vehicle. Donkeys have been replaced. How awful. On behalf of the donkeys, I would like to protest that fact. Anyway, let's move on. So, which countries have reserves? Oh, obviously, America's favourite country, Venezuela, has 18.2% of the reserves. So they've got the nearly 300 billion barrels. No wonder the Americans have been upset of losing Venezuela or the control of Venezuela. So, yes. If they weren't basically let's say, trying to control Venezuela, you would have probably had, and they're putting dictators and stuff like that, you would have had a less rebellious population, a more prosperous population like they were in the 60s. And as a consequence of that, the society would be probably more developed and more responsive to providing fuel for, like Canada does. It's a more developed, more stable country and all that. So US interventions in Latin America haven't helped the world or the US. So sometimes Americans sometimes have to remember that being too arrogant in the way you treat other countries can backfire on you, and has on many occasions. So just remember that. But anyway, let's move on. Venezuela, number one. Still number one. But unfortunately, now that the socialists are running the place down there and have no idea what they're doing, they've basically destroyed that industry completely. So no wonder they will remain having the highest reserves until those nutcases are removed by their people, because that's the only way it works. Their people have to step up and remove these people who are corrupt and have destroyed the country over decades now. So Saudi Arabia is the second one, and they're hoping that they can basically build their super city on the northwest coast of Saudi Arabia, that long strip they're building. Then Canada's the next one after that, but with woke Trudeau and people like that, that industry is likely to decline, not grow. Then you've got Iran, America's best friend. No, not. So, yes, they got about nearly 9.5%. And then you've got Iraq, which is still a basket case at the moment. Kuwaitis, they're in a bit of a situation. The Emiratis, next one's down. Then you've got Russia. Then you've got Libya, another basket case. Nigeria, with a lot of internal problems. Then 11th is the United States. And they only got there, they used to be much lower than that. They're there because of shale oil. That's really what it is. The US is much lower in the good stuff. So what they use is a lot of their factories, or their refining stations are actually designed for Saudi oil, for Middle Eastern oil, not for to refine shale and a number of other things. So what they do is they export that oil and they import from a number of other parts of the world, because they can still use that as to refine it. So a lot of people don't know that in the US, but that's really what's happening. A lot of the refineries still were designed at a time when they were pretty much using oil with a different sulfur content that was coming from the Middle East and other parts of the world. So then you've got Kazakhstan, then you've got Qatar, then China, 14th, Brazil after that, Algeria, Mexico, and so on and so on. And the UK's 30th now. And Australia's all the way down to 38 with 0.07%. So we're a tiny player in the oil market, much bigger in the gas market, in the natural gas, but in the oil market, we're a tiny player. Some in Western Australia, some in the Bass, and the other parts in the Bass Strait, and most of the other areas you can't extract due to environmental laws. So, and the lowest of the lowest is the Ethiopians, I believe. So Ethiopia is the one that's got the least oil in the world out of most countries. So very unlucky, very close, just on the other side of Saudi Arabia, but they never got the liquid gold ticket. I don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse. Possibly a blessing, because they were the only country in Africa that never got colonized, or, well, an attempt of colonization was by the Italians, but they did lose. But it remained independent as a nation, probably because it didn't have oil. So people left it alone. So there you go. That's what the oil market looks like. Now, I don't believe that we're going to run out of oil, but it's just going to become more expensive in the future. And what will happen is motor vehicle companies and other people will have to just make their machines more efficient, lighter materials, stuff like that will happen. And that's what will happen. So when people tell you that, it's going to end, everything ends at some point, but it's going to be less of an end. It's going to be more of a decline. And as we decline, we will shift, and technologies, the ability to produce hydrogen really cheaply will take over at some point. I believe it won't be now. We're still not at that point at this stage, but I think that by possibly the end of this century, or early the next century, we'll have the capacity to produce really cheap hydrogen fuel. Not right now, but by then. And at that point, then you'll have this quick transition over from petroleum-driven cars to hydrogen-driven cars. So that will happen eventually at some point. I can't see electric cars becoming the mainstream. They're not. For the simple reason that the amount of rare earths, amount of minerals and stuff, there's just not enough in the ground to basically provide to support an industry long term. Just isn't. There's plenty of iron, that you can use to build motor engines and stuff like that, but there's just not enough, and many aluminium and other things like that. But when it comes to a lot of the rare earths that are required for batteries, now some of the solid state batteries that do exist do require less of some of these rare earths and all that. They're still in the early phase, experimental. Whether they pan out or not is unclear. So obviously that will help slightly grow that market of EVs to some extent. But there is only so much you can get out of that. And as that video will show, we need sometimes like equivalent to mining extraction of 2019, something like for some of the rare earths for thousands of years or hundreds of years of equivalent levels of extraction, which means the entire planet would have to become an open cut. Everywhere. There'd be no forest, there'd be no nothing. Every part of the planet would be a mining area to provide the minerals needed for the electric revolution. Not going to happen. So it's a pipe dream. Things like Tesla and other cars like that will just be expensive vehicles and limited to certain markets, limited to certain amount of people. I mean, China has invested a lot in electric EVs and is dominating that industry globally at the moment. But also they are going all over the world, trying to get into Greenland, and Trump's trying to stop them there. And everywhere around the world, they control something like the cobalt extraction in the Congo. They actually control about, I think at the moment, slightly over, I'm not exactly sure, I think it's slightly over 80%. I could be wrong, but it's close to 80%. So they are trying to get as much of this material for your solar panels and all these things and windmills, and so I can't see it happening. There's just too much that is required to make it happen. So ultimately, what I see is the nuclear industry will grow. And also the hydrocarbon industry will continue to grow until it can be replaced by hydrogen, or maybe something else. If we could get to the moon and we could actually mine helium-3, which is massive deposits, very little on this planet, but massive deposits up there due to solar radiation, the way it actually hits the moon, and it actually leaves these massive deposits from the solar winds, massive deposits of helium-3, which is sort of a byproduct of fusion that's happening in the sun. So if we could extract that, you could actually create a fusion reactor that doesn't need the sort of protection and all that, because you don't have, it doesn't work like tritium, and in fusion reactors that we currently have, we're using deuterium and tritium, and you've got a lot of, and these are heavy isotopes of hydrogen that have got a lot of neutrons, and neutron radiation tends to damage the reactor. I mean, there's some recent research that has actually shown that they can use new types of magnets, superconductive, that can actually reduce the amount of damage to the interior of the reactor. That's still a work in progress, but helium-3 would resolve that. You could have fusion without that problem, and you don't need to then. You could also extract the energy much more efficiently, up to close to 70% theoretically, through an electrostatic effect. So extracting through this electrostatic effect from the reactor, which would provide very efficient sort of energy for us, as long as we can get that stuff from up there down here. Now, a space elevator would do that very fine, but we don't have space elevators. And carbon nanotubes, while we can produce them, to produce them in the quantity and the structure that we, the sort of how we would need them to build a space elevator, is still technologically not feasible for us at this point in time. Maybe in the next century that will be feasible, and we'll be able to have such reactors. And once we have such reactors, we'd be able to, put them into vehicles, space vehicles, and, sort of energize coils that could actually create this, what do they call, like a light vehicle. You can create sort of these fields as magnetic fields, and you can actually then repel within or move to be able to move through the atmosphere, and we would be able to get into space way more economical. Theoretically, there is a light craft somebody has developed using this sort of technology, and they're using sort of laser beams to sort of guide the thing. It's a miniature thing to get into space, but to scale that up, that would be another option to basically get to the helium-3 and bring it back in that regard. So, or even use it on the vehicle to be able to fly up there and get it and bring it back. So, look, there's a lot of different potential technologies that will emerge in the future and be developed. But at this current stage, that's where the oil situation is. I think the most important thing is not to really worry too much about peak oil. It's more to worry about the geopolitical sort of instabilities that will happen in these sort of regions, because the majority, if you remember when we were looking at it, let's go right to the top there. And so when we're looking at the countries, out of the top 10, what do we got? Venezuela. Saudi could also become less stable, but we'll exclude them for the time being. Iran, Iraq, Libya, Nigeria. About half of them, because Nigeria have, up in the north east, there's a number of groups, Al-Qaeda groups and other things, that have really destabilized the country quite a bit. So they have internal instability, and also they have in the south where the oil is, they have a number of rebels there also, poor people that have had some of their land taken away from them by the government, haven't been compensated because they're corrupt, and obviously they're fighting back. And so that also creates a sovereign threat to oil supplies, in a sense. So that's another thing. So you've got half of those countries that are very unstable. So that's a problem in terms, and these are key countries. And then the other ones, you've got like Kazakhstan, which is in Central Asia, and there is also some risks. And then there's a number of, the smaller ones, most of them in Africa or Central America or places like that. And they have their own issues, political issues in terms of stability and things like that. So in general terms, you're looking at more than half the world's oil production coming from areas which are not that stable. And then you've got probably a third, if you include, well, more than a third, probably about 40%, if you include places like Saudi, Russia, places like that, that could also cut off the supply as a for political reasons if things, heat up again. So you've got that situation as well. We've had oil shocks in the past. And so between now and the middle or the early part of the next century, expect a lot of oil shocks, a lot of wars related to oil and supply of oil. They won't be like in the past in that regard, like big amount. It will basically be a lot of them, in some cases, may even be where mercenaries, like a bit like the Wagner Group that Russia sent in Africa and Middle East, something similar like that. Others may be using around the world to secure their oil. Yes, someone else's oil becomes their oil. So you expect to see more of these type of conflicts and more of this type of friction, because you've also got this large shift between West and Eastern consumption, and one is putting pressure on the other. There's a lot of pressure there. I mean, it's not something the media talks about, because it's not fashionable to say we need to get the oil, because obviously, with the green nonsense, it's really hard to make that argument to the population. But really, that's really what there is, a competition of who can secure resources on this planet, because they're becoming more finite. This is why a lot of people are talking about we need to get the space to be able to tap into the resources there, in the type, within the asteroid belt. You've got these big rocks that are full of minerals and full of resources. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars worth just in one asteroid. So you can imagine that the dollar signs are quite large in some people's eyes, and they would love to get up there because it means that they could be able to extract that. And that, if they could actually economically get to be able to do that, it would definitely make the first multi-trillionaires would be the people that control that industry. So we're talking about there's a lot of money to be made in space in the long term. But there will be a lot of upheaval continuing in the Middle East, parts of Africa, and parts of Central America, for the simple reason that there is the competition for raw materials is growing, not declining. Even for food security, it's growing, it's not declining. And that's why you see China trying to buy up farmland everywhere, and many other countries doing very much the same, or big multinationals from certain countries doing the same thing. There is, the future, commodities are going to be very important. Especially if the world goes to shit, really you're looking at farmland and commodities. That's what we're really talking about, is going to be the most valuable thing, because, you need to eat and you need to produce things, and you need to basically be able to move around, and you need those primary industry products. So you will see a future where the countries that produce a lot of primary industry goods, like Australia, parts of South America and other parts, are going to be, for a period of time, are going to dominate the world economy again at some in the future, as that old model, which is the financialized Ponzi scheme, comes to an end at some point. How long they can push it, is hard to say. It seems that the system is able to be pushed further and further. You will see digital currencies and all sorts of things, restrictions and controls in order to be able to protect these currencies, these Ponzi currencies. But at some point, people will demand hard cash. And when they start doing that, the current system will unravel. When that will exactly happen is hard to say. Very difficult to predict. As one person said, I remember saying, if I knew when I would die, I would dig up my own burial site and jump in. So, but unfortunately, we can't predict what the future will hold. But we can be certain that we're not going to end up in a peak oil catastrophe, a world without oil catastrophe. That's not going to happen, guys. Anybody that's pushing this sort of we're going to run out of oil, we're going to run out of hydrocarbons, nonsense. There is shitloads. It's just more expensive. That's the difference. The only difference is it's more expensive to extract, and it's going to be more, But as I said earlier, other industries, when they're pushed, they will innovate. They will produce lighter vehicles. They will, change the way we produce cars to be much lighter, require less oil. That's what they're going to do as oil becomes more expensive. But, it's not going to end the oil industry anytime soon. So that's just nonsense. Don't believe that crap. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an idea, what people are talking about, why they're concerned, and why people look at that clock and go, oh, it's only 47 years. No, it's not. But we do need to make a lot of reforms in our own economic systems, and it's for you guys to prepare yourself. So look, if you it's much smarter to get out of the big cities and look at a plot of land. If if you've got a plot of land where you can actually secure like a homestead or something like that, you're going to be in a much better place if things really go south in that regard. But at the same time, you need to realise that the world isn't going to run out of oil. The world isn't going to become really another dark, a sort of a hellhole in that regard. No. What we will have, as I said, will be economic shocks, and we'll have a lot of instability and small wars, regional wars like we've had in the past. They'll just be more intense compared to the past and more bloody because of the technology we use. So expect that. And this is another reason why the elites are trying to control the narrative and control the information. And it's fundamentally because they know this is going to happen, and they know that they're going to need to go and actually take the stuff. And in order to take the stuff, you need to basically be able to bullshit, oh, these are really evil people. We need to go there and sort them out. Not that we're going there to take their stuff, we need to sort them out. So in order to be able to run those narratives in a world where the information is really hard to control and restrict, that's another reason why they hate X. The reason why they hate X is because it's part of a media component, a global media platform that they can't control. And it's not only them. Let me make it quite clear. The elites at Davos are not just Western elites. The Chinese are there as well. They're in it up to their eyeballs. They want the same control. It's all of them. So you've got to be very careful, because I see some people, while I sympathise that Russia in this conflict, they were pushed, they had an existential threat. I mean, if the Russians were building bases in Mexico, the Americans would invade immediately. Let's be honest about it. Or the Chinese were building bases that invade immediately. They would not allow Mexico or Canada to fall within the sphere of influence of their main rival. That's quite clear. That's what is called hard politics. In the world, hard politics. I'm a realist in geopolitics, and I believe in hard politics. All this nonsense about the rules-based order, and all that. Yeah, it's fine theoretically, but unless you're able to enforce it and willing to enforce it, it means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It's just another one of those colourful things. Cyprus has been, was invaded and occupied for 50 years. Nobody's done anything about it or said anything about it. On top of that, you've got the European leaders that want to bring Turkey in to a European defence system. That tells you everything. They're more interested in money, and they don't care about the future, whether they're actually building a rival, a revisionist power like Turkey, which could threaten Europe 50 years down the track. This is how crazy these people are. These globalists are only interested in what they can grab right now, and do not care about the future. And I was surprised, but I'm not entirely surprised, that it was the Polish leader that said, bring them in. I go, don't you realise the Turks are bringing all these immigrants in, they're setting them up to Belarus, and they're trying to push into your border, and you want to bring them in? Are you insane? Are you stupid? Seems like he is, But again, he's another globalist-controlled puppet. So what do you expect? I think many Poles are starting to realise that, or waking up at least about that. Another extremist in their political myths. But the reality is that we're not running out. These are just, it's all bullshit. There are all sorts of resources available. The question is that whether we have the type of governments, and it's us as citizens, whether we elect the right people that not only represent us, but actually push these new solutions that will make our lives better, rather than react to crises after crisis and then use those crises to manipulate us to do their dirty little scheming wars or whatever else they want to do, which is what they regularly, the globalist elites tend to do. And unfortunately, a lot of people are still falling prey to their propaganda. A large part of the population is still, as my father calls it, he calls it in Greek the chazokut. That's the TV. He calls it the stupid box. The box that actually makes you stupid. Unfortunately, still a lot of many in the population are still getting their prime information on a daily basis from the controlled media. So while X helps, it's going to take some time before more and more humans on this planet realise that there are better sources of information, and that they also need to step up as citizens to reduce the amount of tension on this planet. We can work together and find solutions in that regard. And rather than actually turning around and looking at all the other countries, oh, it's your fault. That's a typical, what I call weak leadership, when you point the finger at somebody else. What are you doing to make your country stronger? It's like on a personal front. If I criticise others for my own problems, well, that's very weak on my part. It means that I'm not standing up and I'm not trying to find solutions around. You can't control the world, or can't control every player or every factor in the world. But what you can do is you can learn to maneuver and find solutions that better work for you. That means being proactive. And that's the sort of leadership we also need. We need proactive leaders. I mean, whatever people think about Trump, I've got well, I'm critical about certain aspects of him, other things I like about him. But I tell you one thing that he does have, he has, he creates a bit of uncertainty, forces change, forces rethink. It's an admirable characteristic because that uncertainty gets you thinking and gets you thinking about also other options, which many people don't think about. So I do like that disruption, as long as it's targeted in the right way. But at the same time, obviously, Trump is for America. He's not for Europe. He's not for Australasia. We need here our own Trump-type leaders that will put our countries first. You know, like Trump is putting his country first. He's trying to clear up the corruption in the public service, in that society, which is endemic and quite bad. I suspect the same stuff exists in Australia and most other European countries, possibly even worse than America, or less, depending on the country. But we, as citizens in our own societies, need to step up and take some responsibility. We can't just point the finger at, oh, it's that bad person. Well, didn't you vote for them? So stop pointing the finger at that bad politician, but didn't you vote for him? Is usually my question. When I hear people bitching and complaining, I usually say, well, did you vote for that person? They go, That's when they started, yeah, you did, didn't you? Well, didn't you have other options? Why didn't you exercise them? Oh, you know, oh, the stupid box told you not to vote for the other people. Oh, is that the reason? And you're going to listen to the stupid box again at the next elections and vote for the same idiots that you're complaining about. Isn't that right? Exactly. I mean, we need to call people out, even in our families and all that, because they continue harming not only themselves but the rest of us by voting like, blindly, or what they're told by the media. They need to start taking responsibility for their lives. And when we say their lives, we mean also their political participation in the society that they are part of. They're not, living on an island all by themselves. Their actions within their own countries have consequences. And so you don't need to be nasty. That's not the way that it works, but you need to point out the obvious and get them thinking a bit about the choices that they're making and the damage that they're doing to themselves, and remind them to their kids, grandkids, especially when they're older, telling their grandkids, you're not going to be here very long, old fella. Do you give a shit about them that you're leaving behind? So we need to personalise it as well, I find. Some people initially, you'll rattle their cage, you leave it at that, but they will think about it. Sometimes that rattling their cage is a good thing. Not being nasty, just rattling their cage, So, anyway, that's pretty much about it. To cover this subject matter, are we near peak oil? Not even close to it. Are there better options? Yes, but we need to invest and we need better leadership in order to realise those new options. Anyway, that's about it. See yous.